Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I have a great show lined up for us tonight. We're going to be talking about California Senate Bill SB 649, which is a bill that's going to expand wireless small cell technology to every home in every street in California. It's a disastrous bill. It only came on my radar a couple of weeks ago. It's been sailing through the California legislature. And tonight we're going to talk about why this bill is bad. With me tonight, I have Paul McGavin, Lena Pooh, and Julie Levine. Before we get into the Senate bill and why it's so bad and how we can stop it, I want to have everyone share their personal story. Julie is a friend of mine from Occupy LA. Julie, I've known you for a long time. You developed your electromagnetic sensitivity during Occupy. Why don't you tell us what this means, what symptoms you suffer from, and how it's affected your life?
Sure. During the Occupy LA movement, as you know, we were out on the streets a lot. I served as a legal observer, so I was often in the line of fire. And during our protests, I particularly felt it at one of the May 1st actions. The police were using some kind of a scrambler technology, some kind of a stingray thing, which disrupted our cell phone signals and also disrupted us. Like, I actually fell to the ground. I felt really, really ill. I started vomiting, things like that. Now, I have to say that I know I'm not alone. So many people in the Occupy movement, both here and in New York, were affected, so much so that we still have an Occupy EMF harm weekly conference call. This is a big problem for us. I developed a sensitivity after this type of technology, which are also tools of warfare using radio frequencies, were used to disrupt our protests. It was further exacerbated when I was ironically, after the movement, I went to kind of regroup. I went to Brazil, to the Bahia coast, and I was on a cell phone, and I got very upset on, I don't know if you remember this, Lauren, I'm sure you do, but New Year's Eve, 10:30 at night, when Obama signed very quietly that NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, into law, this was the end of 2011, which for the first time was militarizing the police and et cetera. I was so upset that I started trying to blast it out. And when I did that, suddenly my phone switched, and I saw it. It said microwave pulse. And a pulse went up my hand, up my arm, up all the way through my neck and my head. After that, I was really ill. Now, I also was a homeowner here in Topanga, and in August of 2012, they unrolled the smart meter program in my neighborhood. I did opt out of it because I understood it was an energy surveillance tool, and also because I had already developed this sensitivity. I figured, too much of a bad thing. So, but I had neighbors with smart meters, and also I had electric poles right outside my house, and they were definitely putting stuff, and I'm sure Paul knows more about this, but stuff into the infrastructure of those poles and those lines that to enable these smart meters. That was really affecting me. I remember I called Edison and I asked, hey, could my neighbor's smart meters be affecting me? Because I'm feeling a shaking underneath me. I was being woken up by what felt like an electric shake with vomiting and diarrhea. I actually went down to 98 pounds at one point. And I really thought I was going to die. I felt like I was horrified because I just didn't know where to go. And then somebody I knew in Topanga who didn't have smart meters, who was pretty far away from all the cell phone towers, offered to find a place for me. And ultimately, I've just been here ever since. I have nowhere else to go. And, again, I feel that if this, Senate Bill 649 goes into effect, which it certainly looks like it will because the telecommunications industry is running the show, that people like me we're going to have nowhere to go. And there's so many of us now. There are more than anyone is willing to acknowledge. Other countries are really on top of this. But of course, here in the United States, the telecommunications industry is the final, everything.
Right. Okay, great. Such an awful story. And I have seen you suffer with this for the last 5 years. Okay, so now we have Lena. Lena, why don't you tell us about your personal story, how you developed this electromagnetic sensitivity?
I developed sensitivity probably around the time when smart meters came into my neighborhood, which is about 2009. I didn't start having symptoms until about 2011, and I had, the typical insomnia, body aches and pains, and most telling thing was actually heart palpitations and heart arrhythmia. That's when I realized that there's something going on in my environment, because I'm a very healthy person otherwise, and I've always eaten healthy and have been physically active. So having these weird organ internal issues, I started thinking this might be the environment. And at that time, I kind of knew about wireless was a form of radiation, but I didn't really look into it so much at that time. But when I started having the sleeplessness, the insomnia, and the heart pains and the body aches, I started looking into electromagnetic radiation. And then that's when I realized that, my whole house, my husband had installed a wireless router. That's when I discovered there was a smart meter on the house. That's when I discovered my entire computer setup, including my printer. It was all wireless. I was blanketed with wireless around me 24/7, no matter where I was inside my own home. So I started playing with the devices. I started turning everything off. And that's when I realized, wow, I was starting to sleep. I was starting to regain my health slowly and surely. Just being able to sleep through the night, I just got better over time. And that's when I realized this wireless stuff is pretty nasty stuff. The whole time, actually, I have to tell you, I never had a cell phone. So that was one thing that I really have to thank myself for having saved my health, is that I never owned I actually don't own a smartphone. I never owned a smartphone. I have a flip phone, but I never keep it on. I only use it to make emergency phone calls. So there are ways to keep your home situation clean and safe. But what's going to happen is that SB 649 is going to completely take that right away from every homeowner, away from them being able to keep their homes safe of this toxic electromagnetic radiation.
Okay, so now I want to talk about the bill.
Yes.
So maybe Paul can get back in there and tell us about SB 649.
Hi, I'm Gavin. Nice to meet everybody. Just give you a little background on myself, not much of a story. I'm a software engineer, and I've gotten advanced training in measuring and mitigating electromagnetic radiation. So I know how to use all those meters and figure out what's going on. And we have metered in Palo Alto, California, where they already have small cells installed, and it's not a good story. So SB 649 has been a bill that's gone all the way through the Senate. It was passed 32-1 by the Senate. Only Senator Glazer voted against it. And that means a few people didn't vote because there are 40 senators. And now it's going through the Assembly, and we're at the bitter end right now. And it all comes down to Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher. She is the Assembly Appropriations Chairwoman. And it's up to her whether she's going to keep this bill essentially in purgatory, which they call suspense, or whether it's going to come out of suspense, and that's going to happen on Friday. So the more calls we can get to Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher to let her know you do not want any cell phone towers 10 to 20 feet from your home, we might convince her to not allow this bill to go forward. Right now in the Assembly, it went through 2 policy committees, and that is called local government. It passed that committee 6-2, and then it went through communications and conveyance, and it passed that committee 10-0. So people are pretty much prepaid, meaning all of the contributions it takes to run the Senate from the wireless companies is being reflected in these bill totals. The unfortunate part, though, is that these Assembly members and the senators are fully ignoring the substantial scientific evidence that we have placed into the California public record back in July of 2015. And there's a list of over 120 studies that we have put into the record properly, legally. So they actually are now liable for ignoring this information. And that's the important part of why Lena has written a bit of testimony she wanted to give at the Appropriations Committee on August 23rd. That testimony was stolen from her by Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher and given to a telecom lawyer. We are petitioning to make sure she can give that testimony again on Friday, but this is what it is. Why don't you tell her why you wrote this?
This testimony is more about liability, because we're talking with legislators, and the testimonies, the personal testimonies aren't striking a nerve on them. So what I did was I outlined this testimony really to show people how they can write their statement of notice of liability. So when you write your letters to the legislators, please write notice of liability and take notes from what I'm about to share with you right now. So what I'm going to share with you is this testimony that I had written that should have been shared last week at the hearing. It was stolen from me. I showed up at 7:30 at the door. I was first in line. There's evidence of it. I was photographed with the time stamped, and they actually said they told me to get off of the table because they're going to let this the telecom lawyers speak. So anyways, I'm just going to share with you the 3-minute speech that I had written, and please take note for your own.
How about you share the paragraphs that I asked you to share?
Okay. This is a notice of liability regarding trespassing technology pertaining to SB 649. SB 649 calls for infrastructure-dense placement of small cell antennas on utility poles that will use both 4G and 5G technology. These dense antennas form high-powered beamforming microwave radiation and will emit dangerously high levels of radiation, including overlap and crossfire on and around private dwellings and businesses without owner consent. We demand this bill be halted immediately due to serious violations against existing federal laws and the U.S. Constitution. When state and municipalities engage in cooperation and injury results, the individual legislators, cities, counties, and the state of California will be held liable for, but not limited to, health, safety, injury, property, security, privacy, and economic damages. SB 649 breaks federal and state laws and codes by allowing telecom companies to claim eminent domain of private property, to install private antennas on utility poles and public rights of way, which effectively melds this property, creating a dangerous condition of public property. This melding transfer of liability is passed on to the legislators, local communities, and the state. This also trespasses private properties by placing antennas perilously close to homes that causes an invasion of private living spaces with dangerous microwave radiation without respite. To violate existing federal laws such as the Americans with Disability Act, the Fair Housing Act, and Section 8 housing. The ADA recognizes EMS as a disabled characteristic in 2002. To displace EMS people from their homes and deny them safe housing options because the antennas would be installed at street level. SB 649 will displace both myself and millions of Californians from their homes. To ignore the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which states, quote, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property," unquote. And finally, SB 649 will cause tremendous waste of energy in running wireless networks when it is well established that fiber optics are the fastest, most energy efficient, reliable, secure way to transfer data. Fiber optics to every home is ADA compliant, does not emit radiation, and is the answer for California's broadband needs.
So I'd like you to talk about the fact that this was an ALEC bill. A lot of my viewers are familiar with the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's a right-wing organization comprised of many companies, although we've outed them and we've gotten a lot of companies to withdraw from ALEC, but mostly they're known for their right-wing laws like the Papers, Please law that Joe Arpaio used in Arizona, the Stand Your Ground law in Florida that George Zimmerman used to get out of being held responsible for Trayvon Martin's murder, the emergency managers law used by Governor Rick Snyder in Michigan to basically take over local control from the cities of Flint and Detroit and some other cities so that their mayor and their city council have no power. This is the first time I've heard of a model bill being introduced by Democrats. Can you talk about the process of this bill being written? I understand that about 50% of the states are having some sort of version of this. And in our case, Ben Hueso, who's a Democrat, introduced it. How did it get introduced? I am sure it's because he gets campaign contributions from the telecom companies. Tell us a little bit about the background.
Sure, no problem. Well, you know ALEC and what it's all about. It's funded by the Koch brothers. And what they've done is they have about 25, 26 different, slightly different versions of these bills. But what they have is a wish list that the telecom industry has off to the side. And what they do is they actually know that when they first put the bill forward, not all of it's there. They go through a bit of a negotiation. They put a couple amendments on, and they pick something else off the wish list. And they keep putting something else off the wish list. So every edit introduces more and worse things for the public and better things for the wireless industry. So it's a very carefully orchestrated strategy. Ben Hueso is nominally the author of this bill. He didn't write it. Specifically, he went and took this thing that was handed to him by the CTIA, which is the Cellular Telephone and Internet Association. That's pretty much the association funded by AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. And so they took that forward. Why did they pick Ben Hueso? Well, Ben actually had a DUI arrest back in August of 2014. So he was actually very much at risk in his district. So they started burnishing his image by putting more money into his community. We have a picture on our website, scientists4wiredtech.com. Go to blog. You'll read all about this stuff. But essentially, he's standing there with a $25,000 check from AT&T. It's all it took, folks. 25 grand, but Quirk, who's the co-author, got $500,000, and he got $500,000 for his community right after they passed the July 15 bill called AB 57, which was the first small cell bill. The important part about these bills is the firefighters get it. They understand that these things are hazardous. So they actually were lobbying against AB 57 back in July of 2015, and they cut a deal, a private deal, with the authors of the bill in order to get an exemption. So the exemption was they wouldn't place these towers on fire stations. And guess what? That exemption comes back in SB 649. We have a fix for the bill. The fix for the bill is to really say, yes, it's good to protect fire stations, but don't stop there, because you have to protect the fire stations and the police stations and the hospitals and the residences and the parks and the wilderness areas. All of them need a 2,500-foot setback. Why is that? Because cell phone towers, as you know them today, belong 2,500 feet away, 200 feet in the air, for a very good reason. You do not want a lot of radiation right in front of your house. Proximity is the most important and disastrous part of any radiation exposure. Distance will bring that signal, which is very high at the source, down to a very low level of radiation. Let's just call it 5 units. 5 units of radiation is sufficient to make a phone call or a text. And those are the only things that are required and necessary for telecom legislation, is the ability to have an emergency call or text. At 5 units of radiation, you get it. What are these small cells for? Nothing there, because 98% of all California already can make a call or a text. These are about selling you a television subscription, fixed wireless from the poles.
Okay, let me...
The exposure. That's what this is about.
Okay, so what I understand from reading Bruce Kushnick's articles in the Huffington Post, and he was unable to make our show tonight because he's on deadline, he's been following this since the early 1990s. And apparently, they've been promising us wired connection. They've been promising us fiber optic. And we've been paying for it in our little taxes, in our landline bill, and our cell phone bill. And this is a bait and switch to get out of actually wiring the homes and instead doing these little cell towers, which, as I understand, could be every 5 homes or every 2 to 10 homes. So I guess 5 is in between that. And they can be quite large. One of them I read could be as large as a refrigerator.
That's right.
So why don't you tell us about, and of course, Lena mentioned some of the groups that were in favor of this. And I looked at the list of supporters and opposition, and I noticed the very same minority groups, the Black business groups, the NAACP chapters, the Latino chambers of commerce, et cetera, these were the same groups that when I testified at the California Public Utility Commission hearing, they were doing a hearing on whether they should approve the merger of Comcast and Time Warner. These were the very same groups that came to testify in favor of approving the merger. And that is because they get so much money from these telecom companies to fund their nonprofits. And so it really is instructive how these things work. And I did notice in the list of opposition, every single local government, or actually you told me more than half, so it wasn't every single, but more than half of the local governments were against this, because the bill also gets rid of local control, gets rid of the ability to have zoning laws to zone out these cell towers, which is the same thing that AB 398 just did, Jerry Brown's cap and trade bill. It basically took control over regulating pollution from the source. So this is a very similar bill. This is kind of like their MO. And I wanted you to talk about Palo Alto and Weston, Massachusetts.
So essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to put these cell phone towers pretty much in every light pole, one per block throughout and they did. They put about 19 of them in a 3-block area of downtown Palo Alto. You need some context, however, about how much radiation actually damages people. Well, we have an excellent study of that. And so it was done from 1953 to 1978 with a captured population that had no idea they were getting exposed to microwave radiation, but they were for the entire time, because this was our American embassy personnel living and working in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. These are the Cold War years. So you had to live in the same place where you worked. And what happened is the Russians, who do well understand the effects of microwave radiation, who in fact have only allowed fiber optic to the home. They don't do any small cells there because they understand and they get it. The same thing is happening in South Korea, and the same thing is happening in Germany. You want to do fiber optic to the home for broadband. But what they did from 53 on was they started bombing, if you will, just broadcasting right at the building about 250,000 units of microwave radiation. Well, that's enough to actually cause damage. 3 of our ambassadors died during this period of time, 2 on the job and 1 when they came home, from glioblastoma, brain tumors, and from leukemia. But they also had miscarriage, and they had all the classic symptoms of microwave radiation sickness. It started with sleep disturbance and neurological problems and foggy thinking and just too much histamine response. And so there are a whole number of effects that were studied here that have a statistically significant higher incidence among this embassy population versus the other embassies. And as such, the federal government, after 10 years of study, paid hazard pay to these people. That is the federal government's recognition of 250,000 units of radiation being hazardous. We went down to Palo Alto on April 21st of this year. We measured with precision instruments how much radiation was on the sidewalks. It was between 720,000 and 1.2 million units of radiation. Yes, that's about 5 to 6 times higher. That's what's on the sidewalks of Palo Alto today from so-called small cell antennas. And it gets worse because you read the documents and you see, oh, we made our radio frequency calculations based on the fact that we're only going to go down the block maybe 500 feet. In order to do that, we only need 6 watts of power as input. So if you only need 6 watts of power of input, then you have to ask yourself, why are you installing antennas that can actually accept 500 watts? And why are you putting power supplies on the sidewalk, the size of a refrigerator, that can output thousands of watts? And the answer is there's enough power there to put on any future application you might want to do on a pole. And any future application could be pretty much anything, because once the real estate is grabbed, then there's no more public process, there's no more review, there's no more checking. And then tomorrow, hey, if you want to do some surveillance, no problem. Climb the pole, put on the microwave transmitter that bounces off your interior environment. We can image the whole thing. Oh, tomorrow we're going to listen to person-to-person conversations. We don't have to capture your cell phone signals. We can hear you talk person to person because we're within 20 feet of your house. This is what can happen by putting all of this power on the sidewalk. Our amendment to fix this says 2 things. Number 1, you can't put them in residential zones. Makes sense. Number 2, give a 2,500-foot setback to make sure it doesn't get too close to you. If you do that, you can't put these in residential neighborhoods. And only then do you comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those were the 2 main things. But there was a third thing we asked for, and that was to right-size the power supply to the intended purpose. In order for you to go 500 feet down the block, you only need a power supply about the size of your hand. Therefore, you could fit that in a 1 cubic foot box. Clearly, we don't need 35 cubic foot refrigerator power supply boxes for every antenna. You actually have to look at these things as the tanks in the warfare, and you have to shrink the size of the tanks, the power supplies, so they can't keep deploying new and better weapons. The weapons are for surveillance and the weapons are not unlike crowd control weapons
Yeah.
that the first person, Julie, was suffered from. The active denial system is also on our website. You can take a look at that, but that's used for crowd control today. It was used up for the pipeline up in South Dakota that they were protesting, and it's been used in other Occupy movements, and people do get sick from them.
I always heard the term LRAD or sound cannon, but now I understand that LRAD is short for electromagnetic radiation weapon. And, you know, they're telling us that these things are not harmful to human health, and yet they're using it as a weapon. So I find it very ironic. Julie, do you want to jump in since you had the experience with that?
Sure. Well, the interesting thing about it is, I mean, the stuff really, the palpitations, I got all of that, and the arrhythmias, and I got the shakes. All of this started when they were using this technology during our protest, and it started to other people that were involved in the movement as well. What I want to say is that people who have broken blood-brain barriers, like myself, who've had previous concussions, are particularly vulnerable to these kinds of symptoms. We're like people who are on pacemakers, people who have immune deficiencies. We're particularly vulnerable to this, and they know this, but they don't really care. We're kind of like the canaries. Other people are going to be feeling the symptoms that we feel. Now, in terms of the technology, as I became educated, as I had these symptoms, I learned a lot from a guy named Dr. Barry Trower. He's a British scientist, and he is an expert on radio frequencies and their use in warfare. The United States and Britain have been using these for many, many, many years. They know just how damaging they are, and yet they keep using them. And I do at some point, if we have time, want to talk a little bit about how disheartening it was to get the response that I got from my local, seemingly liberal elected officials on this.
Yes, I was actually going to segue right into that, because you actually lobbied Henry Stern, and Henry Stern was Fran Pavley's environmental deputy, and her choice to take over her seat when he'd out. And he was sort of a hero with the Save Porter Ranch community, because he wrote and pushed through SB 57, which basically said they would need to figure out the cause of the leak at Aliso Canyon Gas Storage Facility before they could reopen it. And he really did fight for that bill, but ultimately Jerry Brown killed it because his sister is on the board of Sempra Energy, which owns the facility. And Henry Stern, he was good, but then he also voted for the dreaded AB 398. It was a cap and trade bill that Jerry Brown ran through the legislature that actually had so many free allowances and offsets that it's questionable as to whether it's even going to meet its greenhouse gas reduction targets. Relate the story of our friend Liz Barrett.
Yeah, I'm going to start with Liz, because she did this before I did. Liz Barrett, who's a local activist and also electromagnetically sensitive. She actually talked to Henry Stern very early on when he was running for office. And she said, can we count on you to support, not putting more cell phones in our area? We're very concerned, our sensitivities. And he promised her that he would. In fact, she gave a lot of money to his campaign as a result. And then once he was elected, she said, look, can I still count on you for support? He said, absolutely, yes. I will write a statement to that effect. He never wrote the statement. She called and followed up. He said, I wrote the statement. We never saw a statement. And then, of course, he voted for the bill, as did Kevin De Leon, the liberal senator pro tem. Okay. And for me, it's like, and so I approached Henry Stern. I was at a progressive Democrat meeting at the Topanga Library, and I went up to him as he was walking out and chatting with people. And I said, look, I'm one of these people. I have electromagnetic sensitivity. I'm very ill. I'm quite concerned. This bill is coming up, 649, and you voted for it. What's that about? He says, I got to go. And he just walked away from me. Mr. Nice Guy went out the window. Similar reaction, by the way, Liz got from our mayor, Eric Garcetti. And she went and did a little background, and it seems he's got some background, and you may know more about this, Paul, but he's got some background in wireless, and I think he has also taken funds. I think these people are taking funds from telecommunication. What a shock. And I just want to say, too, I have this page, No Smart Meter Coalition, on Facebook. A lot of information is there. Time is of the essence. I hope that all of us are making this clear to you. We really have to act very decisively and very quickly.
Yes. Now, I put on the list, the last thing that I posted was the list of California legislators. And as Paul says, it is most important that we call them. Email is too late. We need to call them. We need to jam their phones. And if you look at my last post, we have the list of legislators' phone numbers, including, most importantly, Lorena Gonzalez. If you only can make one call, call her, and you're asking her to keep it on suspense. So, Paul, why don't you talk about the suspense process and how it got into suspense? Because usually appropriations, there needs to be some cost associated with implementing a bill like that.
Yeah, there's huge liability to this bill because, unfortunately, because it does violate ADA and actually puts the liability directly on the individual assembly members as well as to the state and to the local communities. It would be more than $150,000 cost to the state of California. Therefore, that's why they put it on suspense. Suspense is essentially a purgatory. It just marinates for a week, and then she can make a decision. Now, Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher made a smart decision on a bill last year, AB 2395, which was about AT&T's Kill Landlines bill. AT&T got that passed in maybe 20 states, but they did not get it passed in California because Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher stood up to the corporate interest and she kept it in suspense, and that bill died. We're asking her to do the same thing with this bill. We want her to walk away from the most important the relationships that she has, because her buddies are actually the author of the bill. You know, Huesa and Gonzalez Fletcher share a district. And we know that Senator Lara is a good friend of hers, and he actually is the appropriations side on the Senate. They passed it through. So many of her friends are passing it, but we're asking her to step away. Don't worry about your friends. Do the right things for Californians and make this at least a 2-year bill so you can fix the clear liability issues with it. But with the dates are the following, that on Friday, just Friday the 1st, 2 days from now, she is going to decide whether to allow this to go forward to the assembly floor or not. If we do nothing, it will go through. If we jam her for the next 48 hours, telling her do not do that, keep this in suspense, that's the number one thing we can do. Every single person can call her. We should call her all day long tomorrow, all day long the next day. There should be no respite for this. We should try to get them to say that Californians do not want this to go forward. If it does go forward, then essentially it's going to go to the assembly floor sometime after Labor Day, probably Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. And then it's got a chance to go to the governor. The very same thing we're doing here for Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, you can also do to Anthony Rendon. He's the Speaker of the House. And so he's the one who needs to hear from you as well. His number's in the show notes as well. Those are the two most important people to call now. And after that, it's the governor. And we need the governor to veto the bill.
Well, I got to tell you something. The Bernie-crats right now, I call them the Bernie-crats, but there's a lot of progressives in California that are calling Rendon right now because we want him to move SB 562 out of the Rules Committee. And I think it might even be too late right now. I think we might have missed the deadline to get it into the other two committees before the end of the legislative session. But there is a campaign to recall him. I've done a show on that, Recall Rendon, because we feel that he should have allowed that single-payer bill, SB 562, to advance. Let's talk about Wi-Fi in schools, and then we'll go back to you, Paul.
Yes, I've been fighting wireless in schools for the last 3 years, and I don't know if parents actually know this because there's no parental consent form being sent home with the kids to let them be irradiated. But how I found out was they actually sent in a permission slip to use Chromebooks. And I asked, well, how are these Chromebooks being used? Well, they say, oh, well, it's going to be used wirelessly, like it's some great thing. And then that's when I realized, oh, no, well, how are they going to do this wirelessly? And then so I actually went to talk with the principal of the school. And she said, oh, well, we're getting Wi-Fi into our classrooms. And this was about 3 years ago. And that's when I realized, oh, I really need to get on the ball. And that's actually when I started my activism. So I started talking with the principal, with the IT folks, and I realized that it's actually the school board members who needs to hear this because they're the ultimate decision makers for the school district. What they're doing right now is they're putting access points, these industrial strength Wi-Fi routers on the ceilings of every single classroom. And it's horrendous because they're supposed to function and service at least 100 laptops wirelessly or iPads wirelessly. And is it efficient? No, it's not fast. It's not reliable. As a matter of fact, it's very slow. So what I've done was I've opted my daughter out, and I told the teachers she's not allowed to be in that type of environment. And the teachers are willing to work with me. So what has happened is when she's when they're working on laptops, they actually tell me when that is going to happen. I pick up my daughter from school. I bring her home to work on a wired computer. And then what happens is my daughter gets done with her assignments 4 times faster than her classmates. And what does that mean? Because hardwire access is much faster. It's obviously reliable. Whereas the students, 30, can you imagine 30 laptops, trying to be connected all at once, downloading things wirelessly.
Right.
Now, I have to tell you that the radiation in that classroom is massive. It is massive. There's so much. Just with one device, I had a building biologist test it. It was about 170,000 microwatts just coming off of that one device. And I know the BioInitiative report talks about anything above 1,000 is already in the danger zone. Anything in the 1,000 range and above is in the danger zone. So here we're exposing kids whose skulls are thinner, they're neurologically developing. As a matter of fact, their brains do not finish developing until they're 23.
Right.
Here we're exposing them to this massive amounts of radiation.
Now, let me ask you something. The school districts are locally regulated. So, yes, there is a State Department of Education, but it seems to me that you could go school board by school board. Have you been doing that? And are there any school boards or even teachers' unions that are sympathetic to your plea?
Not really. Most of them are uneducated, and most of them pass the buck onto some other group. And if you talk with the school boards, they'll pass the buck either onto the IT folks, and the IT folks, of course, will deny it. And they go, well, we can't do anything because the IT folks say it's safe, and the FCC says it's safe. What can we do? So I think what we need to do is go up to the state of education, California State of Education, and get legislation written at that level and telling them that, no, we need to go to hardwire solutions. There's all the schools are already outfitted with Ethernet cables. There's no reason to get rid of an infrastructure that's already in place and instead using something that's toxic, that is actually a carcinogen 2B, that is known carcinogen, and spewing it and irradiating the students. And I liken this to it's like a concentration camp. Every time they go to school, they're getting irradiated.
Have you reached out to Roseanne DeMoro at the Nurses Union, and what is her reception to this?
No, I personally haven't reached out to them. We've been full-time here at the legislature lobbying against this bill, trying to put into the public record, which we have, all of the severe rules violations and procedural violations that we have to be able to knock this bill out in the courts. You have to understand that SB 649 had a version in Ohio, and it got reversed by the courts in the first 7 weeks because it was struck down as unconstitutional. Now, they did a dumb thing in Ohio. They log rolled the bill. They stuck it on onto another bill that had nothing to do with it. But at the end of the day, that was the easy reason to give, but it would have been unconstitutional for other reasons. When these guys take oaths, they take oaths to uphold both the federal and the California Constitution. When I say these guys, these are the men and women who become senators or assembly members.
But I did want to have somebody talk about how they can protect themselves, little tips at home to protect yourself from this. Maybe, Julie, you want to talk about that?
Let me start, and then maybe Lena might have ideas. I sleep in a Faraday cage. So basically, as Paul has indicated, these various microwave frequencies, they have different bandwidths. So if you have something that's pretty narrow, like a chicken wire, and you completely enmesh yourself in it, you have to be completely surrounded. It really helps. It's sort of like a sound studio. They're trying to keep out extraneous waves, so they'll do solid metal. But anything that's completely enmeshed on all sides, you can look it up. William Faraday developed it. That's really, really helpful. Some people actually, they laugh at it, but tinfoil and things like that are protecting some people or helping them along. Those are some of the things I do. As Lena mentioned, I have all hardwires. My phone is a hardwired phone. It has a wire. It doesn't move around because those also irradiate. I don't have cell phone boosters. I don't use cell phones except, as she mentioned, emergencies. I live in an area that doesn't have cell signal. which is also very helpful. It's harder and harder now to find these areas, and it's going to be impossible with 649. But those are some of the things that I do to protect myself.
Lena?
Well, actually, I personally can't handle metal because any type of metal reflects, and you have to be very careful with metal. For myself, I basically do a lot of grounding. I try to find places where there's a creek or some bodies of water, and I immerse. I get my feet wet, and if anything, I try to go swimming a lot. And actually what I find is that my body inflammation is reduced and the swelling in my hands and feet actually go away. So what happens is that the electromagnetic radiation gets accumulated in your cells, and then you can discharge. When you ground yourself, you're actually discharging the energy away. So in terms of health, there's also supplementations. You just want to make sure that you're getting enough vitamin C. I think glutathione is a nice detox. So basically a lot of things that can help you detox metals, because metals, people who have high levels of metals, it's also like a little mini antenna inside your body. So reducing metal toxicity.
I actually wanted to know what people that don't have electromagnetic sensitivity can do. I mean, for instance, I use earbuds. When I make a cell call, I don't put it up to the side of my head. And one thing I wanted to mention, because we didn't talk about this, is that Johnny Cochran's wife, Johnny Cochran was OJ's lawyer, and he was the first, celebrity to die of one of these glioblastomas, which is the brain cancer in the sides of the head near the cell phone, this frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the cerebellum. And his wife actually insists that it was caused by his extensive cell phone use. He was always on the cell phone. Similarly, Teddy Kennedy and John McCain. So I think that, we already discussed you don't want to use Bluetooth, but using earbuds would help. Anything else?
Yeah, so the way you want to think about this is that if you do everything you can to reduce the amount of wireless exposure, think about sipping it instead of gulping it, or in terms of smoking, a social smoker, 1 or 2 cigarettes on the weekend versus 3 packs a day. So you have to understand that when you carry your cell phone around, it has antennas that are engaging the tower all the time. And so the idea here is better to turn your antennas off so it no longer can accept a call or a text. It just sits there waiting. Everything will collect on the servers, and then set yourself an alarm every hour or so or half hour, and then just turn your phone on for a few minutes. Get your texts, get your messages, get back to people. And when you make your calls, clearly earbuds help, or use speakerphone. Never hold it near your body. Never put it in your pocket or in your bra or anywhere else. Idea is turn your antennas off first before you ever carry it around. Most importantly in the car, because when you're driving down the road and your antennas are engaged, it loses its connection to a tower every 500,000 feet. So it has to go find another one and another one and another one. And in the car, you're in a metal box. And that will then reflect the radiation on all sides. And you'll get 8, 10 times, 12 times more radiation in a car or a bus or a train than you would if you were just standing outside. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah.
I want to say that there's one really good tool that I think everybody should have, that regardless of whether they're electrosensitive or not, is basically an RF meter. And this will tell you if you're successful or not with your shielding, with your cell phone. Because Paul was mentioning turning off your cell phone. Well, how do you know if your cell phone really is off? If you don't feel it, like Julie and myself, we can feel it. But if you don't feel it, you're not going to know if it's cooking your sperm. So best thing to do is, why don't you get a meter and test to see when you turn off all these functions, is it really turning it off? So there's the Cornet is a decent one. I think there's EDX, the
85?
the one that goes up to 8 gigahertz. Okay, you want to have a really radio frequency meter. Okay, radio frequency meter. Those will tell you. You can look up Amazon, just Cornet, CORNET, and you want to find something that goes up to 8 gigahertz. That will be the broadest range that will pick up Wi-Fi signals. Okay, you want something that'll go up and pick up Wi-Fi signals, and Wi-Fi signals go up to 5.8 gigahertz. Anyways, the other good meter to have is the Acousticom or the Acousticom 2. The Acousticom is more audio, And the Cornet is more visual. It shows you a graph in time, how much radiation exposure you're getting. So those are the two that I would recommend. They're about just shy of $200. The Acusticom 2 is just shy of $200. The Acousticom, however, is about $400 because it's a little bit more detailed. So depending on what you're looking for, either three that I recommend are good for beginners. So Acousticom 2, or the Cornet that goes up to 8 gigahertz.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I want to thank all three of my guests tonight. I want to thank Julie Levine, sorry, I did that all. Lena Pooh and Paul McGavin. And what is everybody going to do? You're going to call Lorena Gonzalez and as many members of that Appropriations Committee as you can. Also call your own legislator. I always advise doing that. Thank you all for watching. And as I always say when I end my show, keep fighting.